theoretical physics, sometimes it feels like you need a decoder ring just to understand the basics, right? But what if we could cut through the jargon and get right to the good stuff?
Well, that's exactly what we're doing today. We're taking a deep dive into superconformal algebras.
Superconformal algebras. Okay, that sounds a little intimidating, even for us.
Don't worry, we'll unpack it all. And trust me, it's way more exciting than it sounds. We're talking about mind-bending math with huge implications for how we understand the universe.
Okay, you've got my attention. So where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, we could actually start with something surprisingly relatable. Conformal transformations.
Conformal transformations. Okay, that sounds a little less intimidating, but I'm not sure I totally get it.
It's simpler than it sounds. Think about resizing a photo on your phone.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
You're stretching and squeezing the image, right? But the angles, the shape of things, they stay the same.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
That, my friend, is a conformal transformation in action.
So conformal transformations are about keeping the essential shape of something, even if the size changes.
Exactly. And these transformations, they're everywhere. From the way the universe expands to how some physical systems behave, even understanding the Big Bang.
Whoa, 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 hold on. So resizing a photo on my phone is like a mini Big Bang.
In a way, yeah. It's all about those conformal transformations.
That's pretty cool. Okay, I'm hooked. But how does this all lead to superconformal algebras? That super part feels like we're about to jump into hyperspace.
Well, get ready, because to understand superconformal algebras, we need to talk about superspace.
Superspace! Okay, now we're definitely in sci-fi territory.
It's not as crazy as it sounds. Think of it this way. Imagine trying to describe a shadow. You can't fully understand the shadow without understanding the three-dimensional object that's casting it.
Okay, I'm starting to see it.
Superspace is similar. It's like adding extra dimensions, hidden dimensions, to our equation so we can describe things that are hard to describe otherwise.
Things like superconformal algebras.
Well, more like supersymmetry, which is a key ingredient in all of this.
Supersymmetry, that's another one of those physics mysteries I've always wanted to understand. It's like for every particle, there's a secret twin out there, right?
That's the idea. We haven't actually observed these superpartners yet, but the math of supersymmetry is super elegant, especially when you bring in the idea of superspace.
Okay, so we've got conformal transformations, superspace, supersymmetry. How do all of these pieces fit together to create these super shapes you mentioned earlier?
You're asking all the right questions.
Yeah.
This is where superconformal structures come in. They're like geometric shapes, but instead of living in our regular old space, they exist in superspace.
So super shapes in a super dimension. Got it, I think. My brain might be starting to melt a little.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, but here's the cool part. These structures, they were first described by a mathematician named Werner Nahm over 40 years ago.
40 years ago, and we're just now getting to this.
Well, it takes time for ideas this big to really catch on. Manin's work was groundbreaking. He laid the foundation for so much of what we understand about supersymmetry and its connection to geometry today.
Okay, so this is big, important stuff. But why should we care? Why are these super shapes in a super dimension so important?
Because they might just hold the key to understanding some of the most fundamental mysteries of the universe. These structures could give us clues about the forces of nature, about how the universe works on the deepest level.
Okay, that's pretty profound. But I have to admit, it's still kind of hard to picture all of this.
Yeah.
Is there a way to make these superconformal structures feel a little less abstract, a little more concrete?
Absolutely. Imagine trying to understand a city by only looking at its outline on a map. You're missing all the details, right? The buildings, the parks, the people, everything that makes a city what it is.
You need to actually walk the streets, get a feel for the place.
Exactly. And that's where derived geometry comes in.
Derived geometry. Okay, now we're really getting into the weeds.
It's not as complicated as it sounds. Think of it like upgrading from a basic map to Google Earth. Suddenly you can zoom in and see all the detail you were missing before.
Okay, I like that. So derived geometry gives us a more detailed picture of these superconformal structures.
Precisely. It allows us to see the nuances, the connections, the things that traditional geometry just can't capture.
So we're getting a closer look at these super shapes, and this is where the math starts to predict the physics, right?
You're catching on quickly. By studying these structures through the lens of derived geometry, we can start to understand some of the most profound mysteries of the universe.
Okay, I'm ready to have my mind blown. How does all this math we've been talking about connect to actual physics, to the real world?
Well, hold on to your hat, because this is where things get really interesting. When we start looking at superconformal structures, especially through this lens of derived geometry, we stumble right into the realm of conformal supergravity.
Conformal supergravity. Okay, I'm hearing gravity, which is already a pretty big deal, but supergravity.
It's exactly what it sounds like. Gravity, but super.
I figured as much. But seriously, what does that even mean?
Think about our current understanding of gravity, right? Einstein's theory of general relativity. It works amazingly well for big stuff like planets and stars and galaxies.
Yeah, it's been holding the universe together for a while now.
But when we try to apply those same rules to the really, really small stuff, the quantum world, things get a little messy.
Like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And that's where conformal supergravity comes in. It's a framework, a way of trying to combine our understanding of gravity with supersymmetry to see if we can get a more complete picture of how the universe works on all those levels.
So we're talking about a potential theory of everything here. That's a pretty big deal.
It's definitely a big deal. And what's even cooler is that the source material we're looking at, it actually recovers known models of conformal supergravity in different dimensions.
Meaning? Sorry, sometimes I need things spelled out for me.
Meaning the math works. When we apply these new tools to systems we already understand, we get results that match up with what we see in the real world. It's a good sign that we're on the right track.
That's reassuring. So it's like the math is predicting the physics, but we're not done yet, right? The source material also mentioned something about twists, and I'll be honest, that part had me a little lost.
Twists. I know, it sounds a little out there.
Just a little.
But it's actually a really cool idea. Remember how we were talking about seeing something from different angles to understand it better? That's kind of what a twist is in this context.
We're messing with the perspective, looking at these superconformal structures from different angles.
Exactly. And by doing that, by applying these twists, we can sometimes reveal hidden connections, new insights that we wouldn't have seen otherwise.
So it's like we're taking our super shapes, twisting them around, and suddenly, boom, new information. What kind of twists are we talking about here?
Well, there's one called the maximal twist.
Maximal twist, okay.
Don't let the name scare you. It's basically about simplifying things, stripping away layers of complexity to try to get down to a more fundamental form.
So by making it simpler, we actually understand it better?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
But there are other kinds of twists, too. The source material talks about holomorphic twists, which bring in tools from something called complex geometry.
Complex geometry? That sounds complex.
A bit more abstract, sure, but it can be really powerful. The basic idea is that we're using a different kind of number system, complex numbers, to explore these structures in new ways.
So we're twisting these super shapes, we're bringing in new math, and suddenly we're unlocking these deeper truths about the universe.
That's the general idea. And it's pretty amazing what we can find when we start looking at things this way.
So are we going to see some of these twists in action? What happens when we apply them to these superconformal structures?
Absolutely. Let's dive into a specific example, shall we? Let's talk about 4 dimensions.
4 dimensions. Okay. I'm following.
Remember those holomorphic twists we were talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, the ones that bring in complex geometry.
Right. So when we apply a holomorphic twist to a certain type of superconformal algebra in 4 dimensions, we discover a hidden connection to something called the higher Virasoro algebra.
The higher Virasoro algebra, okay, gotta be honest, that doesn't mean a whole lot to me right now.
It's all about connections. The Virasoro algebra, it's a big deal in 2-dimensional conformal field theories. It's like a set of rules that governs how certain physical systems behave, but in 2 dimensions.
2 dimensions, but we were talking about 4 dimensions just now.
Exactly. We're taking this concept from 2 dimensions and finding it hidden inside a 4-dimensional structure. It's like finding a secret passageway.
Okay, that's a pretty cool way to put it. So we're connecting different dimensions, different areas of physics through these twists.
You're getting it. And it gets even wilder in 6 dimensions.
6 dimensions, bring it on.
Remember our chat about the 2 superconformal algebra and how it connects to that exceptional, simple super Lie algebra?
Vaguely. There's been a lot of information to process.
Well, the short version is, when we hit that 6-dimensional structure with a holomorphic twist, we find a direct link to a local version of E36.
E36. Now, that just sounds like alphabet soup.
It's a mouthful, for sure.
Yeah.
But in the world of math and physics, E36 is a pretty big deal. It's like this really rare, really interesting object that pops up in some very specific and important places, especially in string theory.
String theory, the idea that the universe is made up of these tiny vibrating strings.
Exactly. And the fact that we're finding these connections between superconformal structures and string theory, It's a pretty exciting hint that we might be onto something big here.
My mind is officially blown. Who knew that diving into these abstract mathematical structures could lead us to the very fabric of reality?
That's the beauty of theoretical physics, right? We chase these crazy ideas, these mind-bending concepts, and sometimes they lead us to the most profound truths about the universe.
And the most exciting part is it feels like we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore, so many more connections to uncover.
Absolutely. This is just the beginning of a very exciting journey. Who knows what other secrets we might find hidden within these superconformal structures?
Well, I, for one, can't wait to find out. A huge thank you to you for joining us today and for guiding us through this incredible world of superconformal algebras.
It's been my pleasure.
And to you, our listeners, thank you for coming along for the ride. We hope this deep dive has left you with a sense of wonder and a thirst for more knowledge about the universe and the amazing mathematical tools we use to explore it. Until next time, keep those minds open and those curiosity engines running. Hey everyone, buckle up because today we're going to try to unpack some seriously dense physics.
Yeah.
You guys have really outdone yourselves this time with excerpts from a paper literally called Local Superconformal Algebras.
Right.
I mean, that just sounds intimidating, doesn't it?
It's a mouthful, for sure.
So it is.
But that's what we're here for, right? To break it down and make it a little less like reading hieroglyphics.
Exactly. So no need to panic. We're your trusty guides to the superconformal universe or something like that, right?
So we're going to tackle it together.
All right. So this paper dives into what you get when you combine two already pretty out there ideas in physics: conformal transformations and supersymmetry.
Exactly.
And the love child of that explosive relationship.
Superconformal algebra.
Superconformal algebra.
That's right.
Really rolls right off the tongue.
But seriously, it's all about uncovering these really fascinating symmetries that pop up in some really specific, honestly, pretty weird theoretical physics situations.
Okay, I am intrigued, but let's back up for a second.
Sure.
For the sake of, let's say, someone who just woke up from a nap and missed the last 5 minutes of our mind-bending physics conversation.
Happens to the best of us.
What exactly are conformal transformations, and why should we even care?
Okay, so imagine you're resizing a photo on your phone, right?
Okay, I'm with you.
But instead of keeping everything, like, proportional, you're only focused on making sure the angles stay the same.
Interesting.
You can stretch it, you can squish it, you can make it huge or teeny tiny, as long as all those angles in the image stay put.
So kind of like those funky world maps where, like, South America is stretched out.
Yes.
But you can still tell it's South America.
Exactly. That's a conformal transformation in a nutshell.
I'm getting MC Escher vibes from this.
A little bit, yeah. It's all about keeping the shapes, the local geometry as we call it, even if the overall size gets messed around with.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Now, here's why these transformations are a big deal in physics.
Hit me with it.
Some laws of physics, especially in quantum field theory, don't even flinch when you apply a conformal transformation.
They just don't care.
It's like the universe has this underlying rule book, and it says, as long as you're messing with the scale and not the angles, these laws still apply.
Whoa, that's deep. It's like finding these secret patterns in the fabric of reality.
That's a great way to put it.
But you mentioned earlier that 2 dimensions get especially weird with these transformations.
Oh yeah, things get really wonky.
Wonky in what way?
In 2 dimensions, any transformation that preserves angles automatically becomes a conformal transformation.
So it's like they're all in on this conformal thing.
Exactly. Like 2 dimensions is where conformal transformations really come alive, you know?
So all that stuff we hear about string theory and conformal field theories.
All because of that unique property.
Huh.
Yeah, it's foundational.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Okay, so we've got our heads sort of wrapped around conformal transformations, I think. But then we're adding another layer of complexity here.
We are.
With this whole supersymmetry thing.
We are?
Which sounds like something straight out of, like, a comic book universe.
It does sound like something out of science fiction. Essentially, it says that every particle we know and love has a secret twin, a superpartner particle.
So there's like a whole other universe mirroring ours, but with like different versions of all the particles.
You're getting it. They might have totally different properties too. Some are even, well, a little bizarre.
Okay, so if I have a pet electron, somewhere out there, there's a superpowered selectron causing chaos.
You got it. Now, you might think this is just a fun thought experiment, but supersymmetry actually helps physicists tackles some pretty major mysteries like the standard model of particle physics.
Really? So it's not just theoretical fluff?
Not at all. The standard model, even though it's amazing, it still has some gaps, some things it just can't explain, and that's where supersymmetry comes in.
Like a superhero saving the day.
Kind of. It smooths over inconsistencies, ties up those loose ends, and just generally makes our picture of particle physics feel more complete.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we've got these shape-shifting transformations with conformal symmetry, and then we've got this whole other universe of mirror particles with supersymmetry.
A lot, I know.
It is a lot. But then what happens when we weave those two threads together?
That's where we get to superconformal algebras.
I'm starting to feel like my brain might melt down.
I promise, it's not as scary as it sounds.
Okay, I'm listening, but you're on thin ice here.
Okay, so think of superconformal algebras as the rule book for when you combine those two things.
Conformal symmetry and supersymmetry.
Yes, exactly. Like, imagine taking the rule book of our universe and just adding a whole new chapter about these superpowered symmetries.
Okay, I think I need to sit down for this.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, isn't it?
It really is.
But it's pretty amazing stuff.
Okay, let's take a quick pause here to let our listeners digest all this information.
I think they'll need it.
And we will be right back to dive deeper into superconformal algebras and what they mean for our understanding of, well, everything.
It's going to be a wild ride.
That's for sure. Stay with us. Okay, so just to recap, we've got these conformal transformations, stretching and squishing things while keeping the angles the same.
Right, like that funky map of South America we were talking about.
Exactly. And then we're adding in supersymmetry with all its superpartner particles.
Like your selectron causing trouble.
Exactly. But how does all of this, these superconformal structures, actually change how physicists think about geometry? I mean, usually when we talk about geometry, it's all about distances and angles, right?
Yeah, right. But superconformal structures, they kind of flip the script.
Oh, so?
Instead of using metrics to define distances, we dive into the world of odd distributions.
Odd distributions. Okay, now you're just messing with me.
I know, it sounds a little strange, but trust me on this.
All right. You've earned some trust. I'll bite. What are these odd distributions?
So, think about it this way. Instead of looking at all the possible directions at a point in space, we're choosing a specific set of directions.
Okay, so instead of measuring how far apart things are, we're focusing on specific directions. But why? What makes them so special?
It's kind of like, remember when we talked about complex geometry?
Vaguely.
Instead of the usual tangent space mathematicians, they often focus on something called the holomorphic tangent space.
Right, it's like a zoomed-in view, right? Focusing on just the directions that matter for holomorphic functions.
Exactly. And in a similar way, with superconformal geometry, these odd distributions, they zoom in on the directions that are related to supersymmetry.
So it's like we're putting on these special glasses that highlight the supersymmetry part of the geometry.
Yeah, exactly, you're getting it.
Okay, that actually makes sense.
Good.
But you also mentioned symbol algebras and how they're used to describe these odd distributions. What are those all about?
Well, think of a symbol algebra like a set of rules, a code book almost, that tells you how you're allowed to move along those special directions within these odd distributions.
Okay, so it's like a map, but instead of showing every possible route, it only shows you the ones that work with supersymmetry.
That's a great way to put it. It helps physicists navigate this superconformal geometry, which can get pretty wild.
It sounds like it. But why go through all this trouble? What's the benefit of switching from metrics to these odd distributions in symbol algebras?
That's the million-dollar question. By zeroing in on these structures, physicists can unlock the secrets of something called superspace.
Superspace? Okay, we've officially gone from 0 to 60 in like 5 seconds.
Remember how we said supersymmetry is kind of like a mirror universe with superpowered particles?
Yeah, like my selectron twin is probably out there right now using its superpowers for evil.
Well, superspace combines our familiar space-time with extra dimensions that are specifically related to supersymmetry.
Hold on. You're saying we're adding even more dimensions to the mix, on top of the usual 3 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension.
Sounds crazy.
It sounds like something out of like a science fiction novel.
It does. But think of it this way. Imagine trying to describe how a bird flies.
Okay, I'm listening.
You could talk about its height, its speed, its direction. But if you wanted to fully describe it...
You'd also need to talk about its wing movements and stuff.
Exactly. You'd need to add more details, more dimensions to your description to fully capture it all.
So superspace is kind of like adding those extra details, those extra dimensions to account for the complexities of supersymmetry.
Exactly. You're on fire today. And here's where it gets even more interesting.
More interesting. How is that even possible?
Well, just like holomorphic functions make it easier to work with complex geometry, physicists found a way to apply this holomorphic idea to superspace.
Wait, so they borrowed a tool from complex geometry and applied it to this whole other crazy superspace thing?
They did. And guess what they discovered? They found these fundamental building blocks in superspace called canonical multiplets.
Canonical multiplets. Sounds important.
They are. Think of them like the essential ingredients, the Lego blocks that physicists use to build these complex superconformal theories.
Okay, so like atoms are the building blocks of matter.
Right.
Canonical multiplets are the building blocks of these superspace theories.
Exactly.
Wow, it's like we're getting a glimpse into the fundamental structure of a superpowered universe.
And we're just getting started. By studying these canonical multiplets, physicists are uncovering some really deep insights. There are even hints about the very structure of space-time itself hidden in there.
This is already blowing my mind, and we're only halfway through our deep dive.
I told you it was going to be a wild ride.
That's an understatement. So we've gone from squishing shapes to hidden dimensions, and now these holomorphic building blocks in superspace. What's next?
Now that we have a handle on superconformal structures and superspace, let's talk about how local superconformal algebras tie everything together.
Okay, because I'm definitely ready for some answers after all this. From what I understand, these algebras are kind of like the conductor of an orchestra, right?
Go on.
Making sure all the different parts of the theory are working together in harmony.
That's a great analogy. These local superconformal algebras are all about how different symmetries work together.
So less about the individual instruments and more about the whole orchestra playing in sync.
Exactly. We're talking vector fields, those little arrows showing how things move and change. Supersymmetry transformations are gateway to superpartners. And then there are these mysterious R-symmetry transformations, which, well, those are a story for another time.
You're killing me with these cliffhangers.
We got to save some of the fun for later, Wig.
I guess so, but you've definitely piqued my curiosity. So these local superconformal algebras, they're like the conductor, making sure the vector fields, supersymmetry transformations, and these mysterious R-symmetries are all playing in tune. And this leads to conformal supergravity.
You've been doing your homework?
Maybe just a little bit.
All right, hold on to your hat because things are about to get really interesting.
Okay, I'm ready for whatever really interesting thing you've got for me. You were about to explain conformal supergravity.
Right. Well, we've talked about supersymmetry being like this mirror world, right, with all the superpartner particles.
Yeah, like my mischievous electron twin out there somewhere.
Conformal supergravity, it's kind of like taking that idea of a superpowered universe
Okay.
and actually applying it to gravity itself.
Whoa, wait, so we're taking like Einstein's theory of gravity and just adding supersymmetry into the mix?
Exactly. Trying to figure out how supersymmetry would change our understanding of how gravity works, like at its core.
That sounds ambitious, to say the least.
Yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart.
So where do these local superconformal algebras fit into all of this? They seem pretty important, but I'm still not quite sure I get how they connect to everything else.
They're like the blueprint for building this whole crazy complicated theory of conformal.
Okay, so like a set of instructions for how to put it all together.
Exactly. By looking at the relationships within these algebras, the vector fields, those supersymmetry transformations, even those mysterious R-symmetry transformations.
Oh, right. Those are still bugging me.
We'll get there, I promise.
Okay.
But the point is, physicists can use those relationships to figure out what you need to build this theory, to make sure it all fits together logically and mathematically.
So it's like we're using these really abstract mathematical structures to understand something as fundamental as gravity.
And in a universe with superpowered particles, no less.
Right. It's mind-blowing.
It really highlights how powerful math can be, you know?
I'm starting to see that, yeah.
Like it can guide us even in these areas of physics that seem so far removed from our everyday experience.
Totally. But hold on, we're not done yet, are we? There was something you mentioned before about this thing called twisting.
Ah, you're remembering.
Yes. That's supposed to take all of this to like a deeper level or something.
Okay, so imagine like a Rubik's Cube.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And you twist one of the layers. You're not changing the individual squares.
Right. They're just in a different spot.
But you're changing how they're connected to each other.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
That's kind of what twisting is like in physics. It's a way to shift our perspective on a theory And sometimes when we do that, we can uncover these amazing, unexpected connections.
So it's like we're looking at the same thing, but through a different lens.
Exactly. And what's really cool is that twisting can connect areas of physics that, at first glance, seem totally unrelated.
Like what?
Well, for example, by twisting certain superconformal algebras, we can actually find links to string theory.
Whoa, hold on. You're saying there's a connection between all of this superconformal stuff and string theory with those tiny vibrating strings that supposedly make up the universe.
You got it. Specifically, if we twist certain four-dimensional superconformal theories, we get these things called higher Virasoro algebras.
Oh boy, here come the big words again.
It's a mouthful, I know. But remember when we talked about the Virasoro algebra in our string theory deep dive?
Yeah, it was all about how those tiny strings vibrate, right?
Exactly. Higher Virasoro algebras are kind of like their more complicated higher dimensional versions.
Okay.
And twisting shows us how they pop up naturally from these four-dimensional superconformal theories.
So we're really talking about a bridge between two different worlds here.
Right. It shows us that there's this deep connection between superconformal algebras and string theory, even though they might seem totally different at first.
It's like finding a secret passageway between two hidden rooms or something.
Exactly. It's one of those things that makes theoretical physics so exciting.
I can only imagine. So what else is there? Are there more secret passageways to find?
Oh, there are always more secrets waiting to be uncovered.
Ooh, cryptic. I like it.
But in 6 dimensions, things get even weirder. Twisting leads to something called the exceptional super Lie algebra E36.
Okay, you've officially lost me.
I don't blame you. It's definitely the most complex one yet. Just think of it as this really special mathematical object
All right.
with unique symmetries that only show up in 6 dimensions. It's like this weird thing that points to these deep connections between different areas of physics, connections that we're just starting to understand.
It's like we've stumbled upon this hidden door leading to a whole new level of understanding.
And we're only just starting to peek through the keyhole.
This whole journey through superconformal algebras has been incredible.
It's a lot to take in.
That's for sure. We've gone from stretching and squishing shapes to exploring hidden dimensions.
And even finding hints of even deeper connections in the fabric of reality.
It really makes you wonder what else is out there, you know?
Yeah, it does. If these superconformal algebras can reveal so much, what other secrets are we missing?
What other connections are we just not seeing yet?
That's the beauty of physics, isn't it? There's always something new to discover.
It's a good reminder to never stop questioning, never stop exploring. Well, that was an amazing deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride through the mind-boggling world of superconformal algebras.
Anytime. Always happy to explore the universe with you.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and never stop exploring. Okay, so we're diving into this local superconformal algebras research.
Right.
And honestly, when I first saw this, I thought, whoa, this looks intense. But we're going to break it down, right? Like, you don't need a PhD in math to follow along.
No, not at all. Absolutely not.
So from what I gathered, these superconformal algebras, they're like these mathematical structures, and they can help us understand some pretty big concepts, right? Like symmetry, even gravity.
Yeah. I mean, you've given us some fascinating research here.
Yeah.
And it really does touch on those things.
Okay, so maybe we should start with, like, what even is a superconformal structure. I mean, the paper compares it to these things called almost complex manifolds, but that doesn't exactly clear things up for me.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Think about it. Like, imagine you're in a maze.
Okay.
And in this maze, you can only move in certain directions, right? Some paths are blocked.
Right, right.
So superconformal structures, they give us a way to map this out mathematically, to describe these spaces, these mazes, where you have these kind of constraints on how you can move around.
So it's not just like wandering around freely. There are these very specific, like, rules of movement.
Exactly, exactly. And that's where those terms, the super and the conformal, they come into play.
Okay, so let's break those down. I mean, I'm guessing that has something to do with supersymmetry.
You got it. It usually refers to supersymmetry, which, that's a whole other can of worms.
It's a whole other deep dive.
Exactly, exactly. And then conformal has to do with preserving certain properties. Like if you stretch or shrink something, the angles between things stay the same.
Okay, that makes sense. But I have to ask, the paper actually says the term superconformal structure might not even be the best name.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the things I found interesting too, right?
Why is that?
Because it's not always directly related to conformal structures in the way we usually think about them.
Huh. Okay, so then what's a more accurate way to think about it?
So when we look closer, right, we see the symmetries of a shape. They might be limited in these spaces
Okay.
because of these movement restrictions. But the ways you can deform that shape, they're actually way more diverse.
So it's not so much about the structure itself being conformal, but more about, like, how things change within it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a more accurate name, maybe something like local scale invariance would be better.
Local scale invariance. All right. So we've got these superconformal structures, or whatever we want to call them, and they describe these spaces with these special rules. But how does this connect to actual physics? Like, why should we care?
Well, this is where it gets really cool. So this research, it actually has implications for something called conformal supergravity, which that's a way to understand gravity that works with supersymmetry.
Conformal supergravity. Okay, that sounds pretty intense. Can you unpack that a little?
Okay, so imagine, right, imagine space-time is like this big flexible rubber sheet.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And conformal supergravity says you can stretch this sheet, you can bend it, you can warp it, but the ratios of distances, they always stay the same.
Okay.
And then you throw in supersymmetry with all its superparticles and
Well, then
parts.
suddenly it's not so simple anymore.
Exactly.
But this research, it's like, it gives us a way to make sense of this really complex stuff, right?
Exactly. And the researchers, they've actually done calculations. They've shown how their framework, it perfectly describes the properties of these things called conformal supergravity multiplets. And get this, they've done it in various dimensions.
Wait, various dimensions, like as in more than 3.
Oh, yeah. Like from one dimension, like a line, all the way to 11 dimensions.
11 dimensions.
Yeah.
Okay, now you've lost me.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
How can a single framework even begin to describe something that complex?
That's the amazing thing. These multiplets, they're like, think of them as collections of particles and fields, and they behave in very specific ways. And this framework, it's like it's a universal translator. It helps us understand how those multiplets operate in all these different dimensions.
So we're not just talking about our universe, we're talking about like a whole range of possible universes.
Exactly.
With different levels of supersymmetry and everything.
Exactly. That's what makes it so cool.
Okay. All right, I'm intrigued, but why go through all this trouble? What's so important about describing these multiplets in the first place? What's the big deal?
Well, it's like each of these universes, right? It's like a different tapestry.
Okay.
And by describing these multiplets, it's like we're figuring out the threads of that tapestry
Okay.
and seeing how they all connect.
I like that, the tapestry analogy. But how do we actually, like, study these superconformal structures? What tools are we using?
So one really important tool comes from this field called derived geometry.
Derived geometry. Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, so remember how we were talking about the maze? So instead of just looking at the paths in the maze, we can look at the functions that stay the same as you move along those paths.
Okay, so properties that are, like, invariant to the movements allowed by the structure.
Yeah, exactly. But now you might think, well, aren't the only functions that stay the same in that kind of situation just constants? Which, not very interesting, right? But this is where derived geometry comes in. It's like we're adding a whole other dimension to our maze.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Another dimension. What does that even mean in this context?
So imagine you put on like these special glasses
Okay.
that let you see the shadows of the maze.
All right.
And these shadows, they're not part of the maze itself, but they give us clues about how it's structured.
Okay.
So derived geometry, it's like those glasses.
So we're seeing, like, a deeper level of information.
Yeah, like a hidden blueprint of the maze.
I like it. So how do we actually use this derived geometry to understand these super conformal whatchamacallits?
Right, so by using this derived model, we can uncover this thing called a commutative differential graded algebra.
Okay, easy for you to say.
Yeah, no, it's a mouthful, right?
Right, a mouthful.
But basically, imagine that the secret code of the maze, it's not just a single number.
Okay.
It's like a whole pattern that unfolds as you move through it.
Oh.
And this algebra helps us see those patterns.
So it's not static, it's like this dynamic system.
Exactly, exactly. And one of the important things for understanding this is something called a structure sheaf.
A structure sheaf. Okay, now you're just messing with me.
I know. It sounds like something out of a botany textbook. But think of it like this. Every point in the maze, it now has a little tag on it,
Oh,
like a little description.
right.
And the structure sheaf is like the collection of all those descriptions.
So it's telling us how the space is put together at like the most basic level.
Exactly. And through this, we can understand this idea of dimension in derived geometry, which it's a bit different than our usual 3 dimensions.
Okay, yeah. How does dimension even work in this context?
So it's not about like physical length, width, height.
Okay.
It's more about how complex those little descriptions on our maze points are.
So a more complex description equals a higher dimension.
Exactly. And we use this thing called the homological dimension to measure that complexity.
Homological dimension. Got it. So it's like we're not limited by the physical dimensions we can see. We're exploring this world where, like, complexity itself is the dimension.
I love that. And this complexity, it's directly related to how these spaces behave when we start twisting them.
Oh, right. The twisted theories.
Yeah.
Those definitely caught my ear earlier. So we're not just exploring the maze now, we're like changing its very structure.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine taking the maze and like twisting it like you would a rubber band.
Okay.
And see how that changes how you can move through it, how it behaves.
So we're twisting these spaces, these superconformal whatsits, and seeing how their properties change.
Exactly. And what's really cool is by studying how the code of the maze changes when we twist it, we can learn these incredible things about these theories.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
So for example, we found that some of these superspaces, they have something called a Calabi-Yau structure.
Calabi-Yau. Wait a minute, isn't that?
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
you twist the rubber band, right? But somehow it still has this beautiful symmetrical shape.
So even in these twisted spaces, there's still this underlying order, this elegance.
Exactly. And these Calabi-Yau structures, they're not just like mathematical curiosities. They actually show up in some really important physics theories.
Like string theory.
Exactly, string theory.
Wow. Okay, so we've got this maze code. We're twisting these superspaces. Some of them have this Calabi-Yau thing going on. But how do we actually make sense of all this in a concrete way?
Right. So that's where these component field models come in.
Component field models. Those sound familiar.
Remember those conformal supergravity multiplets we were talking about?
Yeah, the collections of particles and fields, right?
Exactly. So these component field models, they give us a way to like visualize those multiplets.
So we're going from abstract code to something more visual.
Exactly. Like going from a blueprint to a 3D model.
Okay, that makes sense. So these models help us see how all the different parts of the supergravity multiplet fit together.
Exactly. And how they behave in different dimensions.
This is all starting to click now. We've gone from this maze analogy to this complex code, and now to these visual models of supergravity multiplets.
It's like peeling back the layers of reality, right?
Exactly. So can we dive into some specifics now? What do these component field models actually look like in different dimensions?
Oh, absolutely. All right. So let's start simple, right? One dimension.
Okay.
Like picture supersymmetric quantum mechanics.
Okay.
The most basic kind of supersymmetric theory. The component field model there, it's like a single building block.
So it's like the most basic element in our one-dimensional maze.
Exactly.
Okay, I think I can handle that. What about 2 dimensions?
2 dimensions. Things get a little more interesting. We're talking contact superalgebras now.
Okay.
It's like the code is all about like interactions now. Imagine instead of just wandering around, the particles are like high-fiving each other.
Okay, so in 2 dimensions, the code gets more like dynamic.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, what about 3 dimensions then?
3 dimensions, we start seeing even more structure. We've got the Weyl multiplet,
Okay.
and that includes things like the gravitino.
The gravitino.
That sounds familiar.
You know, it's like the graviton's supersymmetric sidekick.
Right, of course. So these models, they're showing us what the fundamental components of supergravity in 3 dimensions.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really wild, right?
Okay.
As we add more supersymmetry, these models get even more complicated.
Okay.
For example, 3 dimensions max out the supersymmetry.
Okay.
Our model's not just a blueprint anymore. It's like we've gone and added a bunch of extra floors to the building. Yeah. Oh, wow. So more supersymmetry, more complexity. It's like adding more twists to that rubber band we were talking about.
Precisely. And it gets even crazier when we jump to 4 dimensions.
Oh, boy. How so?
We get these even more elaborate models.
Okay.
With particles and fields so exotic, they make gravitinos look boring.
All right. And now you have to tell me more. What kind of exotic stuff are we talking about here?
Okay. So for instance, there are these fields that relate to our symmetry.
Our symmetry. Okay.
And it's like a whole other set of rules that govern how these particles can interact.
So it's like our maze just became a whole city.
Exactly.
Okay, okay. Following, what about 5, 6 dimensions? Those models must be something else.
Oh, they definitely are. 5 dimensions, there's this really elegant case with minimal supersymmetry.
Okay.
And the model we see there, it describes everything we know about conformal supergravity in that dimension.
So it's like a perfect match between theory and model.
Right. And then 6 dimensions with maximal supersymmetry.
Yeah.
We find this amazing connection to this thing called E36.
E what?
Yeah, it's an exceptional Lie superalgebra. It's this really symmetrical mathematical structure.
Okay, you lost me a bit on that last one.
That's right. The point is, these models are showing us deep connections between physics and all this beautiful math.
That's pretty incredible. So what happens when we go even further? What about like 10 or 11 dimensions?
10, 11 dimensions. We're talking mind-blowingly complex models.
I bet.
I mean, we're talking Calabi-Yau manifolds, holomorphic Poisson brackets. It gets pretty wild.
So wild that I don't think I can even picture it.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So we've gone from this simple maze analogy to exploring some of the most complex structures imaginable.
That's the amazing thing about this research, right? It takes us on this journey from something we can kind of visualize all the way to the edge of what we even understand.
It really shows how powerful math is for understanding the universe, even if it does get a little mind-bending sometimes.
For sure. And remember, we've only scratched the surface here. This research also hints at how these superconformal structures could unlock even more mysteries. Like, remember those twisted theories we were talking about?
Oh man, don't remind me. It's like we're talking about universes folded in on themselves.
Right. It's pretty wild stuff.
Absolutely wild. Well, I have to say, I am walking away with way more questions than answers, but in the best way possible.
That's what we like to hear.
It's pretty incredible how these mathematical frameworks can give us these really deep insights into, like, the nature of reality.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure chatting about this with you.
Likewise. And to all our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into superconformal algebras as much as we did. Until next time, keep those questions coming and keep exploring those big, mind-blowing mysteries out there.
Welcome to another deep dive. We've got a fascinating paper here titled Local Superconformal Algebras. So let's jump right into the world of supersymmetry and theoretical physics.
This paper is particularly interesting because it presents a really intriguing mathematical framework for understanding something called superconformal structures.
Superconformal structure. Okay, for those of us who might not be familiar, can you break that down a bit? What are they and why should we care about them?
Imagine trying to understand the universe's blueprint, like going beyond just the shape of space and time. Well, these superconformal structures, they provide a deeper layer.
Okay.
They incorporate these extra dimensions that are suggested by supersymmetry, right?
Extra dimensions.
So they're like these geometric blueprints. Think of them as blueprints that encompass this reality that's much richer than what we usually perceive.
So we're already venturing into some pretty mind-bending territory with these extra dimensions.
It's definitely fascinating. And one of the key things about this paper is it uses this novel mathematical tool called derived geometry to study these structures. And this wasn't possible before.
So it's like we've been looking at, say, a blurry image. And now we suddenly have this new, more powerful lens, and now we can see all these intricate details.
Precisely. It's like we've been looking at this blurry image, and now derived geometry comes along and brings it into sharp focus for us. And one of the really remarkable things that they discovered is this concept they call the local superconformal algebra. It's denoted as CONFET. And it's essentially a set of rules, a set of mathematical rules that govern how things operate within these structures. And what's really cool is they found that this CONFET actually perfectly aligns with what we know about conformal supergravity multiplets.
Okay, so conformal supergravity multiplets, that sounds pretty complex. Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Think of it this way. So gravity as we know it interacts with the universe in a bunch of different ways. Conformal supergravity now offers us a way to view those interactions through the lens of supersymmetry. And these multiplets, they're basically bundles of particles and fields that are all kind of linked to these different facets of gravity.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm following you, we've got these superconformal structures, and they're kind of like outlining the geometry of the universe with supersymmetry, right? And this paper uses derived geometry to look into how those structures actually work.
Yes.
And then they discover this thing called confin. And it beautifully matches what we already know about conformal supergravity.
That's the gist of it. It's like we found this hidden bridge connecting these seemingly separate areas of physics, which hints at this deeper underlying principle.
Fascinating. Now, you mentioned derived geometry as this powerful tool.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how that actually works and what makes it so effective in this context?
In the traditional way we think about geometry, we usually consider functions as being, constant if they stay the same along certain paths.
Right.
But derived geometry kind of challenges that notion.
Oh, so it's changing the rules of the game a little bit.
It is. It allows us to work with functions that may not be constant in the traditional sense, but they exhibit constancy in this more nuanced, derived sense. It's like, imagine you have this special filter that can reveal these hidden patterns within data.
Okay.
That's kind of what derived geometry is doing for these complex structures. It's bringing to light this crucial information that traditional geometric methods just overlook.
So it's like enhancing a blurry image, so to speak, to reveal those details. And this is particularly helpful when studying superconformal structures.
Absolutely. It unlocks these insights that we couldn't access before. And it lets us study these structures with a level of precision that we haven't had before. For example, in this paper, they use it to analyze how these superconformal structures can kind of morph or deform, which gives us these valuable clues about the very fabric of space and time.
Morph and deform. So
Yeah.
we're not just talking about some static structure here. We're talking about something that's dynamic, something that changes.
Exactly. And these changes, these deformations, they're directly related to this concept of fields in physics. You've probably heard of things like gravitational fields.
Sure, like invisible forces that are kind of permeating space.
Exactly. And what they found is when they analyze how these superconformal structures deform, using this lens of derived geometry, they encounter these fields that perfectly correspond to the fields that are associated with conformal supergravity.
Wow. Okay, so they're not just describing these structures, but they're showing how their very essence is intertwined with gravity in this supersymmetric framework. This is already blowing my mind a little bit.
It's just the tip of the iceberg. We should delve a little bit deeper into this local superconformal algebra, this confin, because it's a really crucial part of understanding the implications of what they found.
Okay, let's do that. I have to admit, the idea of a local superconformal algebra, it still feels a little abstract to me.
Sure, think of it like this. Imagine a set of building blocks.
Oh.
Each block represents a different type of symmetry transformation.
Symmetry transformation, so like if you rotate a square, it remains a square.
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy. So some of these blocks, they represent familiar symmetries, like rotations or translations in space and time.
Makes sense. So what other kinds of symmetry transformations are we talking about here?
Well, remember those superpartners we discussed earlier?
Right.
Supersymmetry itself is a type of symmetry transformation.
So it's saying the universe should look the same, whether we are a particle or a superpartner.
Exactly. This local superconformal algebra, this set of building blocks, it includes transformations that are related to both supersymmetry and something called conformal transformations.
Okay, conformal transformations. Can you remind me what those are again?
They're basically transformations that will preserve angles, but not necessarily lengths.
Yeah.
So think about like stretching a rubber sheet.
Got it.
The shapes on the sheet, they might distort, but the angles between the lines, they'll stay the same.
Okay, so this algebra, it's got blocks for supersymmetry, it's got blocks for these conformal transformations. So what is it about this combination that makes it so special, so superconformal?
That's the beauty of it. When you actually merge these two things together, supersymmetry and conformal symmetry, you get this incredibly rich and powerful structure. Like they were always meant to go together. And this algebra gives us the mathematical language to actually describe that pairing.
Okay, so we're talking about a mathematical framework that combines these two very specific types of symmetries. But why is that combination so important for understanding physics?
This is where it gets really interesting. A lot of physical theories, they struggle when you try to describe what's happening at these extremely small scales or when energies get really, really high and things can become infinite and the math kind of breaks down.
The universe explodes.
Basically. But theories that incorporate this superconformal symmetry, they often have this really remarkable ability to kind of remain well-behaved even at these extreme scales. It's as if the symmetry is a type of protection against those infinities.
So superconformal symmetry could help us develop a theory of everything, a theory that explains all the forces in the universe.
That's the hope. And this paper gives us this powerful new lens to explore that possibility. It's like they've given us a more detailed map of this superconformal landscape.
That's an incredible prospect. So they've created this mathematical framework to understand superconformal structures, and it could hold the key to unlocking this unified theory of physics. That's a really bold claim.
It is a bold claim, but one of the things that makes this paper so compelling is that it doesn't just stay in these theoretical constructs. It actually dives into concrete examples, showing us how these findings can apply to the properties of real particles and fields.
So they're not just giving us a cool mathematical idea, they're showing how it can apply to the real world.
Precisely. It's like they're building this bridge between this abstract world of math and the tangible realm of physics. And that's really significant.
All right, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I think we should take a moment to gather our thoughts and prepare for the next stage of our journey into the world of local superconformal algebras.
Indeed, we have a lot more to uncover.
This is already shaping up to be an incredible deep dive. Stay tuned, we'll be back soon to delve even deeper into this world of superconformal structures and what they mean for how we understand the cosmos.
So we've been talking about these, standard superconformal structures.
Right.
But where this framework really shines is when we start looking at these more, shall we say, exotic theories. Things like twisted supergravity theories.
Twisted. Okay, how do you twist a supergravity theory? I'm not sure I'm following.
Imagine you're taking, like, the fabric of space-time,
Okay.
and you give it a little bit of a warp,
Right.
like ripples on a pond.
Okay.
So this twisting, it's basically like a mathematical manipulation of the geometry.
Okay.
And it sort of blends together our usual understanding of space and time.
So we're going beyond just stretching the rubber sheet, now we're twisting it up.
Exactly. And when you apply this to supergravity, it leads to this really interesting kind of reshuffling of the symmetries that are inherent to the theory.
Okay.
But here's what's impressive. The authors show that even with these twisted theories,
Okay.
their framework, using derived geometry and this local superconformal algebra, still works.
It can handle it.
It can handle it. Compton still accurately describes what's going on.
Wow. So even when we're introducing these twists and turns, their framework still applies. That says a lot.
Exactly. It's like having this universal translator for supersymmetry.
Okay.
But they didn't stop there. They took it a step further and looked at how these findings apply to another area of theoretical physics, holomorphic field theories.
Holomorphic field theories. That sounds a bit intimidating. What makes them unique?
So holomorphic field theories, they use this special type of function called, well, a holomorphic function.
Right.
Think of them as being like super smooth, mathematically speaking.
Okay.
And these functions, they pop up in a lot of areas of physics, especially string theory.
String theory, as in the universe is made of these tiny little vibrating strings.
That's the one.
Okay.
And what's really cool is that this paper shows that their framework,
Yeah.
it can be used to understand the structure of these holomorphic field theories in a way that we just couldn't before.
Wow. So their work has implications for string theory too. The scope of this is pretty impressive.
For sure. They've basically handed us this versatile tool that we can use for a whole bunch of different problems in physics.
That's pretty amazing. From supergravity to string theory, it's a lot to take in.
It is. It's quite a journey. But what's really remarkable is how this paper brings all of these seemingly different ideas together.
Right.
Into this cohesive whole. It's like we're starting to see these deep connections between different parts of physics that we never even realized were related.
It's like we've been given this map, but instead of just showing us one route, it reveals all these hidden pathways between what we thought were totally separate areas.
That's a great way to put it. But you bring up a really important point. We've been talking a lot about the theory.
Yeah.
But what about the so what? Why should we care about this stuff?
Right. What's the practical relevance?
It comes down to this. By diving into these theoretical frameworks, we gain a deeper understanding of the universe itself. Remember that quest for a unified theory of physics.
Right. A theory of everything.
Exactly. And as we've seen, superconformal symmetry might just be a key part of that.
Okay.
So in a way, this paper, with its exploration of superconformal structure, it's pushing us closer to unraveling the universe's deepest secrets.
Wow. So they're not just giving us a new theory, they're providing us with a whole new set of tools to actually test and explore these big questions. That's pretty amazing.
And the best part is they back it up with concrete example.
Right. You mentioned they actually applied this to specific cases.
Exactly. They looked at a really interesting one, 11-dimensional supergravity.
11 dimensions. Now that sounds complicated.
It is. It's this theory that plays a really important role in string theory.
Okay.
And within this theory, there's this thing called the supergravity multiplet.
Well,
It's basically like a whole family of particles and fields.
like a cosmic family reunion.
Exactly. And what's amazing is that the authors show that their local superconformal algebra, this confen thing we've been talking about, it can actually predict exactly what this supergravity multiplet looks like in 11 dimensions.
It's like they're saying, based on all this math, this cosmic family photo should look like this. And then they hold it up and it's a perfect match.
Spot on. It's more confirmation that their framework isn't just some abstract mathematical idea.
Right.
It actually reflects something real about the universe and its building blocks.
That's incredible. So they're taking these super complex mathematical tools,
Yeah.
this derived geometry and their local superconformal algebra,
Right.
and using them to predict properties of particles
Yeah.
in 11-dimensional space.
11-dimensional space. Yeah.
Amazing, right?
Yeah. It really highlights just how powerful these theoretical tools can be when we're trying to understand the universe.
Absolutely. They've given us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
But how does this all fit into the broader picture of research that's happening in, say, supersymmetry, string theory, theoretical physics in general? Where does this fit in?
It's important to remember that this research didn't come out of nowhere, and it builds on decades of work in these fields.
Right.
They're refining these ideas, pushing the boundaries. And one of their key contributions is how they're incorporating derived geometry.
Which is a relatively new area of math, right?
Exactly. They're bringing in these cutting-edge tools
Right.
to help us understand these fundamental concepts.
So they're taking these existing ideas, they're adding in these new mathematical tools, and it's leading to these breakthroughs in our understanding.
Precisely. And the great thing about their framework is its versatility.
Okay.
It's not just limited to these specific examples they talked about.
Oh.
The tools they developed, especially this idea of a local superconformal algebra,
Right.
it could potentially be applied to all sorts of problems in theoretical physics.
So it's not just a solution to one problem, it's more like a key that might unlock many doors.
Exactly. And that's what makes this paper so exciting to me. It's not just about the answers it gives us,
Right.
but about the new questions it raises, the new avenues it opens up.
I can definitely see why you're so enthusiastic about this research. We've gone from the basics of supersymmetry to warping space-time, even string theory. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And the amazing thing is, this paper shows us that these seemingly abstract concepts are actually deeply connected to the reality of our universe.
It's like we've been given a backstage pass to see how the universe actually works.
Exactly. This paper reminds us that the quest for knowledge, it's an adventure.
Yeah,
The universe is full of surprises for those who are willing to look for them.
for sure. So before we get too far off track, are there any final takeaways from the paper that you want to leave with our listeners?
One thing that really struck me was how well written this paper is.
Oh,
They managed to take these incredibly complex ideas and explain them in a way that's clear and engaging.
so it's not just groundbreaking research, it's also a great example of science communication done right.
Exactly. It reminds us that science isn't just about equations and formulas.
Right.
It's about sharing our fascination with the universe
Yes.
and inspiring others to join in the exploration.
I love that. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the world of superconformal structures, derived geometry, the search for that unified theory.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the theoretical to the very practical.
We've barely scratched the surface, but even this little glimpse into the world of local superconformal algebras shows us how much potential theoretical physics has to change how we understand the universe.
It's definitely broadened my perspective. I'm sure our listeners are eager to keep learning as well.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, are there any final thoughts, any big questions you'd like to leave them with?
One thing that really got me thinking was when the authors mentioned that their framework could potentially be applied to other geometric structures beyond just superconformal ones.
So what they've developed here, it might have applications beyond even what they explored in this paper.
Exactly. Which leads to a question. What other hidden connections are waiting to be discovered?
That's a great question. It seems like this deep dive, it's opened up more doors than it closed.
There's always more to learn.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that the universe is full of wonders, just waiting for us to uncover them. It really makes you realize just how much more there is to learn.
It's incredible, isn't it? The universe is full of these mysteries, waiting for us to uncover them.
And the tools we use to explore those mysteries, they're constantly evolving too, like with this paper and their use of derived geometry.
It's like we're constantly refining our understanding, getting a clearer picture with each new discovery.
This whole deep dive has been like that, taking us from these really abstract ideas to concrete examples of how they apply to our universe.
And that's the beauty of theoretical physics, isn't it? It bridges that gap between the abstract and the real world.
It's been quite a journey, that's for sure. We started with this paper on local superconformal algebras.
Right.
And we ended up talking about everything from supersymmetry to string theory.
It shows you just how interconnected all of these concepts are.
Absolutely. But I think we've given our listeners a lot to digest.
I think so too. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. But it's also incredibly exciting.
It really is. It reminds us that there's still so much out there to discover.
And that's what makes this field so captivating. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive.
We hope you've enjoyed exploring these mind-blowing concepts with us.
Keep those questions coming and keep looking up at the stars. Until next time, this is The Deep Dive, signing off. Okay, ready for a deep dive into some seriously cool physics?
Let's do it.
Today, we're tackling superconformal structures. And no, it's not a sci-fi invention, though it sounds like it, right?
It does, kind of.
We're digging into this paper, Local Superconformal Algebras. But what's got me hooked is how it links to stuff we can almost grasp, like those bizarre, complex numbers, even hidden dimensions. Wild stuff.
Right. What grabbed me about this paper, it's less about the superconformal algebras themselves, long as they are, but the shapes they describe, the structures, the real find, the how it works manual.
Okay, now I'm even more curious. But before we get lost in the weeds, What is a superconformal structure? It sounds crazy complicated.
Picture this. A soap bubble. More than just a sphere, yeah. It shimmers, it bends the light, it's got that springiness. Superconformal structure is like the recipe for that extra. The paper lays it out in definition 2.1.6, basically. It's like rules for how distances and angles, all that, work in a space, but with this super twist on top.
So we're taking regular geometry and adding a sprinkle of super to make it extra. Now, the paper compares these structures to, almost complex manifolds. For us, non-math geniuses, explain the link.
It's about finding the unexpected connections, right? So imagine a chessboard, but wonky. It's got the squares, but stretched, bent out of shape. Almost a chessboard. Like, our superconformal structures are almost like regular spaces. Section 2.2.1 gets into it a way for mathematicians to get a grip on these weird structures.
By comparing them to something. Yeah, less weird.
Kinda, yeah.
Okay, folks, buckle up, because here's where it gets trippy.
Yeah.
The paper talks about superspace, where supersymmetry does its thing, having its own dimension beyond the ones we measure.
And this is where it gets juicy. We're not just talking about, like, another spatial dimension, but a more hidden one called homological dimension. The paper digs into this in section 2.2.5, even giving us equation 20 to calculate it.
Okay, hold on. Homological dimension. A space can have a dimension we can't even see.
Imagine a flat map of mountains. Shows you where they are, but not how high, right? Homological dimensions like realizing, hey, the map's missing info. It's that hidden something about the space, not length or width, but something that affects how things work inside that space.
So it's like saying this space has hidden depths, but not just spatially. Wild. But how does this connect to actual physics? To something like supergravity?
Local superconformal algebras, that's the bridge. This is where the paper really cooks. It calculates these algebras for different situations, and they're like a toolkit for physicists to describe the crazy interactions in supergravity.
So if the superconformal structure is the blueprint, the algebra is the instruction manual for building within that blueprint.
Nailed it. Like different rules for building with Legos versus, a skyscraper. Building blocks might be similar particles versus what you can do with them is totally different.
Lego supergravity. I like it. But we can't forget this twisting thing. The paper keeps mentioning it, and frankly, it makes my head spin.
Twisting's where things get seriously cool. Imagine taking a donut and somehow turning it into one of those Mobius strips. What?
Yeah, what?
It's not magic, but how we connect things. We can twist how we join the parts of our superconformal structures, boom, totally new mathematical objects.
You lost me at join the parts, but I'm along for the ride.
That's the spirit.
All right, so we've twisted our donuts and explored the hidden depths of superspace fun analogy, by the way.
Glad you liked it.
But now I'm curious, how does all this actually play out? In the real world, or at least the theoretical worlds physicists love to play in.
That's the beauty of this paper. It doesn't just lay out these abstract concepts, it dives into concrete examples, shows how these superconformal structures actually show up in different dimensions.
Specifics. I'm ready. Where do we start?
Let's start simple, one-dimensional supersymmetric quantum mechanics. It's like the baby steps of supersymmetry particles moving on a line, not our usual 3D world.
So, shrinking ourselves down to a single dimension, huh? Like tiny explorers on a tightrope.
Love it. And even on that tightrope, those super rules shape the landscape. Imagine the line having this special kind of symmetry, like a perfect mirror reflection. That's the essence of a one-dimensional superconformal structure.
Okay, a line with some hidden symmetry we can't quite see. What about those local superconformal algebras in this scenario? What's the big reveal?
They tell us the allowed moves in our one-dimensional game. You can slide the line, stretch it, squash it, but those superconformal symmetries, they stay put. The algebra, in this case, it's called the contact super-Lie algebra. It captures those transformations beautifully, the ones that preserve that underlying superconformal structure.
Even in one dimension, we're seeing this dance between the structure, those super rules, and the algebra, the moves that keep those rules unbroken. A cosmic dance almost.
Exactly. And like any good dance, things get more interesting with more partners. Let's bump it up 2 dimensions. A flat plane, up, down, left, right.
2 dimensions, getting closer to home, but still with that supersymmetry twist. What changes?
The super rules get sneakier. In 2 dimensions, 2 types of these superconformal structures pop up, chiral and non-chiral. Like your left and right hands, mirror images, but not the same.
Chiral, non-chiral mirror twins in our 2-dimensional world. Different dance moves, too.
You bet. Each has its own flavor of local superconformal algebra. For chiral, we see our friend the contact super-Lie algebra again, but now on a plane, more room to move.
Our algebraic dance floor just got bigger. But the real world, it's 3D. What happens when we take that leap to our superconformal structures and their moves?
Buckle up, 3 dimensions, things get really wild. Remember how these structures have even and odd parts, bosonic, fermionic, supersymmetry stuff? In 3D, these parts, they start mixing it up in weirder ways, more possibilities.
Layering those even and odd pieces to build something more complex in 3D, but still following those super rules.
Exactly. And when we calculate that local superconformal algebra in 3D, boom, it starts looking a lot like what physicists call conformal supergravity multiplets.
Conformal supergravity multiplets. That sounds important. Break it down. What are those, and why should we care?
Multiplet. Think of it like a package deal in physics. A bunch of particles that always transform together under certain symmetries. Conformal supergravity, that's a whole other rabbit hole, but it mashes up gravity, supersymmetry, and this conformal invariance we've been talking about.
So these algebras, these rule books we're decoding, they're not just math equations. They're telling us about actual particles, the stuff our universe is made of.
Ding, ding, ding. 3 dimensions, and we get this direct link. The algebra structure and the particles those conformal supergravity theories predict. It's beautiful, really.
Give me examples. What kind of particles?
The big one, the graviton, gravity's VIP. And its sidekick, the gravitino of fermion, whole different story. We get gauge bosons, the force carriers, sometimes even more, matter fields. It's a party.
We've gone from abstract math to the literal building blocks of the universe. This is blowing my mind.
It's pretty mind-blowing, right? This connection, superconformal structures, and conformal supergravity math and physics in perfect harmony. And it only gets wilder as we climb the dimensional ladder.
Okay, take us higher. 4 dimensions, lay it on us.
Hold on tight. 4 dimensions, the possibilities explode. Even more types of these superconformal structures and the algebras. Way more intricate, reflecting all the crazy theories they describe.
Variety, complexity of each dimension, it's like we're unlocking a new level of the universe's hidden structure.
You're getting it. Each dimension, a new layer, a deeper glimpse into this elegant cosmic design.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about these 4-dimensional algebras. What makes them special?
For one, they've got even more components than their lower dimensional cousins. That means they can handle a bigger guest list, more particles. Like the Weil fermion, super interesting, pops up in all sorts of quantum field theories.
Weil fermion, it's like discovering a new species. every dimension we add to our cosmic zoo of particles.
Exactly. And the amazing thing, these algebras, with their intricate rules, they're the perfect tools to categorize and understand this whole particle party. Like cosmic blueprints for building entire supergravity theories. It's pretty elegant when you think about it.
It really is. But before we disappear completely into this four-dimensional wonderland, we've still got 6, 10, 11 dimensions to explore. Back for more. Good, because things are about to get even wilder. We've explored superconformal structures in 1, 2, 3, even 4 dimensions.
And now, get ready to have your minds blown wide open 6, 10, 11 dimensions. We're entering the territory of some of the most mind-boggling, potentially revolutionary theories physics has ever cooked up.
Okay, I'm getting those butterflies like we're about to step off the edge of the map. 6 dimensions, hit me.
6 dimensions, my friend. We stumble upon this incredible link between our trusty superconformal structures and, well, they're called exceptional Lie algebras, like the crown jewels of the math world, totally unique symmetries and properties.
Exceptional Lie algebras. Even the name sounds like something out of a physics fairy tale. What makes them so special, and how do they fit into this whole superconformal saga?
So picture this. We're calculating the local superconformal algebra for a specific type of supersymmetry in 6 dimensions, right? It's called 2-series supersymmetry, for those keeping score. And get this, the algebra we end up with matches up perfectly with one of these exceptional Lie algebras, E36 to be exact.
A perfect match. It's like finding the Rosetta Stone of the cosmos. What's it telling us?
It hints at a deeper connection than we might have guessed. These exceptional Lie algebras, they pop up in some of the most profound, unifying physics theories we have, string theory, M theory. This little connection here, in 6 dimensions, it's like a breadcrumb, suggesting the 6-dimensional supergravity theory could be a stepping stone to something even bigger, a more complete picture of how it all fits together.
So our 6-dimensional detour has led us to a potential crossroads, a hint of a deeper connection between these different theories of the universe. This is getting good, but we've got more dimensions to conquer. 10 dimensions, the realm of string theory.
10 dimensions, here we come. Hold on to your hats because things get really wild.
Yeah.
String theory, right? It says those fundamental building blocks of everything, not tiny points, but tiny vibrating strings. And guess what plays a starring role in describing how those superstring theories work? You guessed it, superconformal structures.
Okay, I've heard of string theory, tiny strings vibrating in all these extra dimensions we can't even imagine. But how do our trusty superconformal structures fit in? Are they, like, choreographing the strings?
In a way, yeah. Think of it like this. How those strings vibrate determines what kind of particle or force they represent. Superconformal structures, they make sure those vibrations and therefore the particles and forces change and transform in a way that makes sense, that's symmetrical, consistent. Cosmic choreographers like it.
We've gone from Legos to cosmic choreographers in one episode. It's mind-blowing how these abstract mathematical ideas have such real, concrete implications.
It really is. And the cool thing is, those local superconformal algebras in 10 dimensions, they're the key. Their crazy complicated structure encodes all the nitty-gritty details about how those strings interact, revealing the hidden rules of this cosmic dance.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of reality itself, finding more beauty, more complexity the deeper we go. But wait, you said 11 dimensions M-theory territory?
Yeah.
What's waiting for us in that final frontier?
M-theory is the big one, the ultimate mystery. It's like the theory to explain it all, a unifying framework to tie all those string theories together. And instead of just strings, M-theory says, hey, let's add branes to the mix. Higher dimensional surfaces, like membranes, but even weirder higher dimensional versions.
Okay, from strings to branes, my brain's working overtime here. But I'm guessing these superconformal structures are still running the show, even in this 11-dimensional extravaganza.
You know it. Even in 11 dimensions, they're calling the shots, dictating how those branes move and groove, making sure everything stays consistent, symmetrical, those local superconformal algebras. In 11 dimensions, they're the ultimate toolkit, the mathematical keys to unlocking the secrets of M-theory, of maybe the deepest levels of reality itself.
It's amazing. We've gone from a simple line in one dimension to the mind-bending vastness of 11-dimensional M-theory, all thanks to these superconformal structures. Who knew a few math concepts could be so powerful?
That's the beauty of theoretical physics, and the most exciting part, we're just getting started. Superconformal structures are still inspiring tons of research, opening up new questions, new possibilities. The journey's just beginning.
And on that note, my friends, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of superconformal structures. But don't let the journey end here. Keep those minds hungry, those imaginations firing, because the universe is full of mysteries just waiting to be uncovered. Until next time.